Yeah, record on the computer. Okay, well, welcome to 15-Minute Mastery. This is where we take a few moments on my lunch break, maybe not yours, depending on where you are, to just discuss some tools and strategies for becoming the best version of you that you can be and having a life that you want on purpose. So just to review our last two 15-minute masteries, the secrets of having a life on purpose that we've done already. The first one was the X factor. And that was, the character trait that determines whether somebody lives a life on purpose or just a life that kind of happens to them. And that is the willingness to feel uncomfortable, the willingness to not just feel uncomfortable, but even to feel pain. A lot of people aren't willing to do that. So their life will reflect that. And then the last week that we did this, we talked about the 2-factor ingredient, the recipe for awakening. Okay. Awakening to the reality of what you have going on as it relates to what you want. And that 2-factor ingredient is radical self-honesty. And this plays into the X factor because it's very hard to be radically honest with yourself if you're not willing to feel uncomfortable, because honesty makes people uncomfortable. So you have to be radically honest with yourself. And then the second part, which must go along with the first if the first is going to continue for any amount of time that is useful, and that is radical self-compassion. You have to be willing to forgive yourself for being a stupid idiot. When you tell yourself the truth that I'm a stupid idiot. You have to have compassion for yourself. If you're not willing to have compassion for yourself, if you're not willing to forgive yourself and give yourself some grace, then it's kind of like revealing your worst things about yourself to a bully who's going to abuse you with those things later. Like, no one would do that. Okay, so those are the 2 things. And today, I think it would be useful to clarify what we're talking about when we say self, right? Because last week we talked about self-honesty and self-compassion. We should probably be very precise when we're talking about what self is. And from my vantage point, from my experience, there's actually 2 selves when we're talking about self. And self is really a hot button right now, or it's a hot topic, self-care. Everybody's into self-care, and narcissism is on the rise. So that's, deifying the self. But there's actually 2 selves. So there's self as personality, and that's just your traits that make you unique to anybody else. These are personality traits that come tacked onto your DNA that you're born with. And then the beliefs and attitudes that comprise your perspectives and your perceptions as you grow in your personality and as you form your unique subjective perspective. So that's one self, okay? Also known as ego. Okay. Then there is the self that is the transcendent observer of the personality, the transcendent observer of all the personalities that reside in just one human meat suit, and then all of the other personalities that you interact with. That's the transcendent observer. Now, self as personality is malleable. It changes, right? You're not the same person that you were when you were a child, hopefully. And your attitudes shift and change, your values shift and change as your experience. You gather different experiences, and then you reflect on those experiences and make different decisions about those experiences. So that's malleable. That can change. Okay, you can definitely change from being a selfish, entitled brat into being a humble, loyal servant, depending on your perspective, right? And thank goodness. But then there's the self that is eternal, the self that observes all of it, the self that can reflect and see all of the different iterations of your personality throughout your lifetime, and see all the different iterations of your, oh, for heck's sake, leave me alone. Sorry. And can see all of the different iterations of the personality of a partner or somebody that you've known throughout your whole life, like a brother or a sister. You can see that they're the aggregate of all those things, or maybe not even the aggregate, but just who they are now. And a lot of those aspects of their personality have fallen away and don't comprise their personality anymore. So, and this is the part of us that is important to identify with if we're going to talk about self, because it's eternal, because it's transcendent. It doesn't die. It goes on and on and on, right? And this is the part where we can step back from the personality self and more objectively evaluate the personality that we have created. We can more objectively evaluate the traits and how we've been showing up in the world, and do a, an personal inventory and separate the wheat from chaff, if you will. Decide what we want to keep and what we want to leave behind. But it's that self that's doing that inventory. It's that self that's doing the separating of the wheat and the chaff. And there has to be two selves, otherwise we couldn't reflect on the personality that we've been showing up as in the world. And it's important to more identify with that self, because any other self that we identify with is changeable and is, can be taken from us at any moment. If we're creating our self identity as in relation to our personal relationships, right? If our self-concept is defined by who we are to other people, then we're in really shaky ground, because those people can be taken from us at 3 p.m. on a Tuesday out of nowhere when a semi truck or whatever happens, right? And so that's a really dangerous place to be if you don't know who you are outside of those relationships. So that's my 15-minute mastery. Make sure you know which self you're talking about when you're taking care of the self. Oh, and one more thing about self. So part of the X factor of willing to feel discomfort, it's more precisely is willing to feel discomfort now for comfort later, right? The people who win the human game are the people who are willing to put off pleasure now, pleasure seeking now, and put in the work so that they can have comfort later. When we're talking about self-care, we have to take into account the community of selves. And a person who is loving themselves, they're not just loving themselves now, because if they're just loving themselves now, then absolutely they would give in to hedonistic pleasure-seeking activities, right? Because that's just self now. But self-care is actually taking care of the community of selves. It's caring about self now, but also caring about self next week, also caring about me next month. I care about me next year, and I care about me in my retirement years too. And if I care about all those selves, then I'm going to make very different decisions than if I just care about now self, which really is the separating factor between somebody who's a psychopath and who's not. Because psychopaths don't give a crap about their self next month. They don't have enough empathy for that version of themselves to make decisions that serve that iteration of selves, future selves' best interests. And that's a really scary thing, but that's how they operate. So any comments or discussion that you'd like to offer?
Well, no, this is all good stuff. It's the self-care. I mean, overall, I feel like I'm doing a pretty good job, but you're giving me a good, let's take another look and re-examine it just to make sure.
Cool.
This is good. This is good. Now, I do have some other ideas and questions, but when we go off recording, I want to do that.
Okay. I'll just end it. Well, I hope everybody got something from this. And if you did, please share it with somebody that might be confused about what self they're being called to take care of. And of course, as always, you can set up a free discovery call with me on my website, maryandrew.com. And please join us every Monday at 12:45 for a 15-minute mastery. Thanks for coming.